Today we're going to listen to a story called Can We Ring the Liberty Bell? Before we read it, I want to talk about some words that we're going to hear in this story. Knowing these words will help you be a better reader and a better writer. So this is the word famous. Say famous. When someone or something is famous, they're known by a lot of people. So our picture is of the statue of Abraham Lincoln. And we know that Abraham Lincoln is famous, and this is a famous statue. It's known by a lot of people. He is known by a lot of people as being a famous president. You might read about or watch a famous soccer player. So famous means being known by a lot of people. Center. Say center. A center is a building or place that is used for a special reason. There are many different stores at the shopping center. Government. Say government. A government is a group of people who are in charge of a city, state, or country. We have a government for the town we live in, and the state of Texas that we live in, and the country of America. Brittle. Say brittle. If something is brittle, it's easy to break. So our leaves in our picture right here are brittle. When we step on leaves like this, we can hear them crunch. They're brittle. Signed. Say signed. If you signed something, you wrote your name on it. You may have seen your parents sign something, maybe a check or an important document. Last one, papers. Say papers. So papers have important things written on them. You have papers that you do during the day, and those papers show your good work that you do. So these are our important papers that are important words that we're going to hear in our story. And now we know the meaning to them when we hear them. Before we listen, I want to talk about text features. And we know that text features are things that the author puts in there to help them explain the ideas or to find information. And you might have a certain kind of text feature called captions. Those are words or sentences about a picture. You might have chapter headings. Those are the titles of the chapters in a book. You might see italic text, and that is basically print that is leaning to the right. So this is italic text right here. And you might see text that's bigger than other print in there. The bigger text is usually the more important. All right, so let me get to our story. And today we're going to read a narrative nonfiction book. That's what this is. Can We Ring the Liberty Bell? So a narrative nonfiction is going to give facts about a topic, but it kind of sounds like a story. So our topic, what is it? And the title kind of gives it away. Can we ring the Liberty Bell? So the Liberty Bell is probably going to be our topic. It's maybe something to have to do with it. So look at the cover. What do you think the people on the cover will do? I want you to think about that for a second. All right, so let's start reading. I'm going to turn, I believe that turns it. Let's see. So here's our table of contents. This is a text feature, and we have chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, and chapter 4. And it gives us the titles to these chapters and the page numbers that they're on.
Chapter 1. A Visit to the Liberty Bell. Today is a field trip day. Our teacher says we are going to see a famous American symbol. Melissa says, my big brother plays the cymbals in band. Mr. Chen smiles. Not the instrument. Here, the word symbol means something that stands for something else. Like a heart means love, says Amira. Yes, says Mr. Chen. Can anyone name a symbol of America? The flag, says Benjamin. The bald eagle, says Simon. Good thinking, our teacher says. Today we are going to see the Liberty Bell. Liberty is another word for freedom. The Liberty Bell hangs in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. A copy of the Liberty Bell hangs in every U.S. state. Most states keep their bell in or near the state capitol building. We ride the bus to Independence National Historic Park. Ranger Marcella meets us outside the Liberty Bell Center. Welcome, she says. I have a riddle for you. The Liberty Bell doesn't make a sound. So how can we help it ring? Shake it? Asks Thomas. No, we can't shake it, answers Ranger Marcella. Then I have no idea, says Lila. Keep thinking about my riddle. I'll tell you more about the bell, our guide says. If you want to visit the Liberty Bell, you'll have to spit out your gum and candy. Sticky foods are not allowed near the bell.
Okay, so what do you think is the answer to Ranger Marcella's riddle? I want you to think about that. What do you think the answer is to Ranger Marcella's riddle? It says the Liberty Bell doesn't make a sound. So how can we help it ring? I want you to keep that riddle in your mind.
Chapter 2. A bell to share the news. Look behind me, Ranger Marcella says. During the 1700s, that building was called the Pennsylvania State House. We learn that people in Pennsylvania's government worked in the State House. Ranger Marcella says, let's talk about communication. How do we learn news today? Watch TV, says Ryan. Mr. Chen says, I check my phone. Listen to the radio, Sylvia says. Our guide asks, did people have phones, radios, or TVs in the 1700s? No, we all say. We learn that bells rang to tell people there was news. Then people went to the State House to find out what was happening.
Okay, so how did people get news long ago? It told us. It says that we learned that bells rang to tell people there was news. Then people went to the State House to find out what was happening. How is that different from how we get our news today? So we get our news today by watching TV, by having notifications on our phone or different news apps, maybe through the radio. So there's lots of ways that we get our news today that's very different than how they got their news a long time ago.
It took 19 years to build the Pennsylvania State House. That's because the government kept running out of money to pay workers to build it. We follow our guide into the museum inside the Liberty Bell Center. She tells us that the State House needed a new bell in 1751. Workers in England made a bell that year, Ranger Marcella says. It arrived in Pennsylvania in 1752, but it cracked the first time it was rung. It cracked right away, says Jaden. Yes, it was too brittle. So workers here melted the bell down. They made a new bell with the metal, she tells us. It was hung in the State House. I ask you to adopt the principles proclaimed by yourselves, by your revolutionary fathers, and by the old bell in Independence Hall. Frederick Douglass, 1866. The Liberty Bell is made mostly of copper. It also contains tin, lead, zinc, arsenic, gold, and silver.
All right, so why do you think the workers melted down the old bell to make the new one? It tells us that the bell cracked the first time it was rung. It was too brittle, so workers melted the bell down. They made a new bell with the metal. I think they melted the old one down to make a new one because the original one, was brittle.
We walk through the museum. When the bell was made, Pennsylvania was part of Great Britain, Ranger Marcella says. Many people living in America wanted their own country. They wanted to be free to make their own laws. We learned that our country's founders signed two important papers in the State House. The Declaration of Independence said America wanted to be its own country. It was signed in 1776. The Constitution is a set of rules for our government. It was signed in 1787. Ranger Marcella adds, because these papers were signed in the State House, today it is called Independence Hall. Take a look at this X-ray, Ranger Marcella says. It shows what happened to the bell in 1846. I had an X-ray when I broke my arm, says Zach. We all look at the big X-ray of the bell. We can see a crack. The bell cracked and broke when it rang for George Washington's birthday. Does anyone know who that was? Yes, he was our first president, answers Delia. Correct. He died in 1799. We still remember his birthday, our guide says. The bell rang for the last time on that day in 1846. Yoke, bell, clapper. No one knows for sure why the bell cracked. It may have been rung too much for too many years. Tiny cracks had appeared before, but people were still able to ring it. After the big crack formed, the bell could not be rung again.
Okay, so why do you think the Liberty Bell cannot be rung anymore? Think about that. It has a crack in it already. What do you think would happen if it was rung again? Do you think the crack would get bigger? Or maybe it would get another crack?
Chapter 3. A Symbol of Liberty. At last we see the bell. Why do we call it the Liberty Bell? Asks Mr. Chen. Good question, Ranger Marcella says. Look closely at the top. I see the word liberty right there, says Nicholas. Yes, our guide says. It says proclaim liberty. Proclaim means to tell everyone about something. So proclaim liberty means to tell everyone about freedom. We learn that people began calling the bell the Liberty Bell in the 1830s. Chapter 4. Ringing for Freedom. Can we ring the Liberty Bell? Asks Diana. Sorry, says Ranger Marcella. Remember, the Liberty Bell is broken. It doesn't ring anymore. Mia says, but your riddle said we can help it ring. How can we ring a bell that doesn't work anymore? Ranger Marcella says, we ring the bell by being fair to everyone. We make sure everyone has freedom.
Okay, so the answer to a riddle. How can we help ring the Liberty Bell if it doesn't work anymore? And she said, we ring the bell by being fair to everyone. We make sure everyone has freedom. So we are acting in what the bell represents to us. It represents us liberty and it represents us freedom. And so by doing those things and being fair and freedom to all, we are able to ring that bell.
The Liberty Bell weighs 2,080 pounds, 943 kilograms. That is as much as 260 gallons, 984 liters of milk. It is almost 4 feet, 1.2 meters wide, and 3 feet, 0.9 meters tall. Our field trip is almost over. What do we say to our guide? Mr. Chen asks. Thank you, Ranger Marcella, we say together. Back at school, we hear the bell ring at the end of the day. That bell rings for your freedom from school, our teacher jokes. We all run around on the playground. It's good to be free. Every year, relatives of the country's founders tap the Liberty Bell on July 4th. People also tap the bell in January on Martin Luther King Jr. Day. They do this to honor King's work for freedom for all people.